My topic is particularly on human evolution tonight. What the fossils tell us and why human evolution is a reality. Okay, first of all, I'd like to start with a few definitions just to lay down the groundwork and context. Science, which I study, Charlie studies, for example, is a system of what we know and how we know it. As more is discovered, knowledge and understanding increases. And again, I have to stress that science is not static. It is what we know up to now. Scientists test ideas. They don't prove them. They don't say, we know the answer, we're going to find evidence for what we believe. We actually test propositions. The scientific method is hypothesis testing. We raise hypotheses, we make predictions, what we would expect from our hypotheses, and we test them. A scientific theory is different from a hypothesis. It's a highly corroborated, much tested, but so far unfalsified model of wide applicability. So it started as an idea which grew and became more and more applicable to the world as we know it, and in the process is tested again and again and again, and finally has achieved the status of, well, I said that science is not into actually proving anything, but a scientific theory is something which has never been disproved, has survived everything that has been tossed against it. It's not a hunch, it's not a hypothesis. And finally, let me define evolution. Biological evolution is biological descent with modification, meaning that as a lineage goes on, an interbreeding lineage goes on through time, it becomes modified more and more. And an evolutionist is a scientist who studies evolutionary theory and evolutionary mechanisms. And I've often heard creationists talk of evolutionists as a biologist who believes in evolution. That's not what an evolution is. That is redundant. Practicing professional biologists accept the reality of evolution. We don't believe in it, we accept that it is real, and we act accordingly. Okay, here's some examples of scientific theories. The atomic theory, proposed in about, I think, 1802, and has never been successfully falsified. The theory of valency, how chemical elements combine together to form compounds, theory of electromagnetism, theory of relativity, quantum theory, Big Bang theory, the theory of plate tectonics, the germ theory of infectious disease, and the theory of evolution. These are all things which are far from being just hunches or hypotheses. They are, as I defined, scientific theory before. Okay, evolution is change. A particular fossil, now in the context of human evolution, which we'll now mostly talk about, is not necessarily an ape or a human, of course not, because it may be intermediate. It may be something that doesn't exist now. It is not something to which we now give a name. Or it may be something else entirely. There are lots of sidelines in human evolution. So to insist that all fossils are ape or human is mere semantics. So let's not play the semantic game tonight. Let's not say, what is it? Is it this? Is it that? Because that's not what evolution tells us. Okay, evolution, of course, depends on the geological column. So here we have a general idea of the geological column with now, right at the top, this tiny, tiny little area called the Holocene, which succeeds the Pleistocene. It's the line on the top of the geological column. And then as we go back and back and back through time, we find down both sides, it's like a sort of unrolling sprocket of film. Millions of years. And so here we have, we know very little, but increasingly more, about what happened before the beginning of the Cambrian period, which is nearly 600 million years ago. We've learned more since then. This is quite a long picture. Earth history was, as you see, really long. I mean, really, really long. You won't believe how long it was, Earth history. We call it deep time. Living things changed greatly over this vast, vast period of time. And some, the lucky ones, survived and evolved into other things. Some of them, in fact, didn't change all that much over quite long periods, but they all changed a bit. Others, oh dear, became extinct. Oh, and by the way, how do we know these ages? When these different geological periods started and finished? Well, here's some examples of the methods of dating in geology and paleontology. First of all, radiometric methods. Methods of radioactive decay. Okay, there's first the uranium series methods. The decay of uranium, the three main isotopes of uranium. Uranium lead, that's what they all end up as. Uranium thorium, which is a very useful way station in this. Rubidium strontium, radioactive rubidium decay into an isotope of strontium. And potassium argon dating is by far the most important method of dating fossil hominin sites. What I'm going to talk about is hominins, which is the human lineage from the time our ancestors separated from the ancestors of chimpanzees. Right up to now, we are hominins. Of course, we don't just propose these methods of dating, we test them, we do experiments to find out more and more about them. This is not what I do, but this is what geophysicists do. And I've had the luck to be associated with some well-known geophysicists at the Australian National University and learned a lot from them. Over the past 20 or 30 years, we've learned advances such as step heating, single crystal analysis, which gets rid of the formerly the very prevalent problem of contamination, and of course a method derived from potassium argon called the argon-40, argon-39 method. And all these have been a great advance and helped us greatly in the precision of dating of fossil hominin sites. Radiocarbon. Everybody knows about carbon-14, but what people often don't know is that there is a maximum age that we can date fossils by this method. And it used to be about 35,000 years. That's not much when you can consider Earth history and when you consider the huge ranges of time over which potassium argon dating works. But fairly recently there have been methods of pre-treatment and the development of accelerator mass spectrometry which about double the age at which we can get decent radiocarbon dates. Then there is a series of methods called trapped charge methods. These are three in number: thermoluminescence, optically stimulated luminescence, and electron spin resonance. And for dating of fossil hominins, and these electron spin resonance, like radiocarbon dating, can be applied directly to fossils, whereas potassium argon dating is applied to the sites from which fossils come. And we can sometimes test two different methods of dating of the same site, even of the same fossil, and they agree. Electron spin resonance and thermoluminescence, radiocarbon or uranium thorium dating are all agreed in the ages they give. And there are a few other methods too, which date only very, very recent science. Dendrochronology, which is counting tree rings, growth of trees. Varve counting, which is counting the year-by-year melt of glaciers. And amino acid racemization, which is measuring the speed at which amino acid, which tends to rotate polarized light only in one direction during life, come to sort of settle down to rotating polarized light in both directions. Okay, so here's an example of how animals changed over time. Now, on this trip, after speaking here, I'm going to Germany and we'll visit the Berlin Natural History Museum again for about the 4th or 5th time during my lifetime span, and exhibited in the main hall of the Berlin Museum are huge skeletons of dinosaurs. You see there top right. And between 1909 and 1912, scientists from Berlin went to what is now Tanzania and excavated dinosaurs in late Jurassic deposits, that is to say about 150 million years ago, from Tendaguru in southeastern Tanzania. And they found lots of dinosaurs, very complete, including the gigantic brachiosaurs, which you can see there on the far right. And living on the landscape above the fossil beds were elephants, rhinos, buffaloes, many species of antelopes. There they all are. But their remains were absent from the dinosaur beds. Now, what do we think of this? They weren't present at that time. They were present but elsewhere. No, I have to tell you that in Jurassic deposits anywhere in the world, you won't find a fossil elephant, or a fossil rhino, or a fossil buffalo, or a fossil antelope of any kind. Elephants and rhinos in particular fossilize very well. Their remains are plentiful in fossil deposits, but they're very, very late fossil deposits. And there are so many fossil deposits in which there are dinosaurs, not a single elephant, not a single rhino, etc., 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 not a single mammal of modern type anyway, that one concludes that very probably they weren't there then. They had not evolved then. And this in itself refutes the young Earth model of creationism. If all land animals were created at the same time, as Genesis chapter 1 says, they should have found elephants, rhinos and so on in the dinosaur pits. Now, this tells us that another thing too, that although the theory of evolution is very highly corroborated, as I said, it's still testable. Every time anybody excavates in, say, a Jurassic bed or a Cretaceous bed, something like that, they have a chance to find an elephant or rhino or other modern mammal if it were there. And it never has been. Okay, human evolution. The further back you go in time, the less human and the more ape-like the fossils in the human lineage are. So those that are under, say, about 100,000 years old are very clearly our species, Homo sapiens. A bit further back, they're a little bit different. We class them as Homo something, but not Homo sapien. A little further back, a little different and so on. And we notice that they're becoming more generally ape-like. And an example of this is cranial capacity, which is the volume inside the brain case. Endocranial volume, or ECV for short. And we can use it as a proxy for brain size. The cranial capacity is usually something like about 100, 150 cc's larger than the brain it contains. So there we are, you see we can start at 4 million years ago, bottom left, and go on to the present time, which is on the the right-hand side, and you can see, despite the acknowledged variation there is a gradual, continuous change of cranial capacity, from which we infer that brains are larger and larger and larger. And in case you're wondering, well, okay, where do we break this series? You see, there is no place at which the series can be broken. Chimpanzees have volumes about that size. So the ones just above 3 million years old, you see, have more or less chimpanzee-sized brains. And in fact, they were slightly smaller in size than chimpanzees, so proportionately they had slightly larger brains than chimpanzees. Okay, now what evolution is not? Now I regret to say that most, possibly all, of the creationist literature which I've read, and I mean the young earth creationist literature, either in books or in articles or online, are not science. What you get is, some of them are quotations of scientists taken out of context, where they appear to be admitting that it's all a fake. But very often all we get is cartoons. So here's a cartoon from one Jack Chick, I don't know who he is, called Big Daddy, and this has been on the web since 2002, unchanged. And according to him, you see, human evolution consists of Lucy, which nearly all experts agree was just a 3-foot-tall chimpanzee. Heidelberg Man, which is actually quite human. Nebraska Man, which was found to be an extinct pig. Piltdown Man, whose jaw actually turned out to be that of a modern ape. Peking Man, of which all the evidence has suspiciously disappeared. Neanderthal Man, who was just an old man suffering from arthritis. Nugini Man, which is, I don't know quite what's being made of that. Cro-Magnon Man, and there's modern man. Now, you don't learn anything from that, except that if you are anxious to believe the literal truth, the 6,000-year-old age of the creation of the earth, then this sort of thing, of course, backs you up. Now, I'm going to go through this in perhaps more detail, because I think it's necessary to show you what a shabby thing this is. Okay, Lucy, here we are. This is actually a simple lie. Not one expert agrees that Lucy was just a chimpanzee, 3 foot tall or anything else. So I'm sorry, but here we have an example of a creationist telling quite a large porky. There's the skeleton of Lucy, by the way. And Lucy was one of a large number of fossils of a species called Australopithecus afarensis, whose remains are known from various sites in East Africa between 3.75 and 3 million years ago. And there's a selection of the fossils. And among them you'll see at least 3 actual skulls. One of them, the one at the top, is that of a child, 2 adults, lots and lots of jaws, facial fragment, bottom left, and so on, and so on, and so forth. There are lots of fossils of Australopithecus afarensis, of which Lucy is one. It has the most complete skeleton, and that's why Lucy is so famous. Not chimpanzees. Okay, so here we go. Another line. Heidelberg Man is not conceded by many to be quite human. It's not conceded by any to be quite human. There it is, there's the jaw, and this jaw is the type specimen of a species called Homo heidelbergensis, which is known from many, many sites. Here we are in Europe and Africa between 600,000 and about 300,000 years ago. And in Europe, after about 300,000 years ago, it grades into the famous Neanderthal people. And after about 250,000 years ago in Africa, it graded into our species, Homo sapiens. And we have such a complete fossil record that there seems no doubt that Homo heidelbergensis is the common ancestor of our species and the Neanderthal species. And here's a variety of fossils of Homo heidelbergensis. Some of them quite complete, and you can see two of them on the left. Left in the middle is an intermediate between Homo heidelbergensis and Homo sapiens. That one's from Africa. And bottom right is an intermediate between Homo heidelbergensis and the Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis. Sorry, something slipped off to the right of the slide. Nebraska man and Piltdown man. These are mentioned without fail in all young earth creationist publications, whether on the web or in print. Okay, yes, more or less correct, but irrelevant. Note that Nebraska man, so-called, is called Hesperopithecus heroplucki, that's the scientific name it was given. And it was described in 1922 by Henry Fairfield Osborn from a single tooth. It was a very silly mistake, but Osborn was at the same time a scientist, and he said, I will try to fund an expedition to go back to the site to find more and to see if I was right. Well, an expedition did go back to the site, and they did find more, and he was wrong. And they showed that the tooth and other remains later found at the same site was that of a fossil peccary. Not a peccary. Peccaries are pig-like creatures, but they separated from pigs back in the Oligocene period, which would be about 30 million years ago. Then there's Piltdown man. Yes, correct, but again irrelevant. And like so-called Nebraska man, it was shown to be fraudulent, or Nebraska man was silly mistake. Piltdown man was actually fraudulent by scientific testing. So both these are in fact triumphs of the scientific method. Whereas Nebraska man was a silly mistake, Piltdown man was a fraud, and whereas Nebraska man lasted for just 5 years while people believed in it way back in the 1920s. Piltdown man, unfortunately, lasted for 40 years before it was shown to be fraudulent. And there's, you see, human evolution, people have been fascinated by human evolution, and in fact it's been replete with silly mistakes and indeed frauds. Not in modern times. Nobody would try that on now because stratigraphic methods, dating methods and so on are sufficiently sophisticated that there is no danger of a fraud now. But here's some examples of fraud: the foxhole jaw, the Aberville jaw, the Calaveras skull, and Malachite man. And all these, it's interesting, though they are frauds. Yeah, they were frauds. They were attempts by people to fool, usually enthusiastic amateurs, archaeologists or whoever. It's very interesting that I have seen them quoted in the creationist literature as examples of modern humans living contemporary with these fossils that are supposed to be their ancestors. Nonsense. They are all frauds. None of them are. Okay, Peking man. Supposedly it says 500,000 years old, but all evidence has disappeared. It's a half-truth. This was discovered in the 1920s at a locality in Zhougotien, which is southwest of Beijing. And in the 1930s, excavations in this cave, the locality 1 cave, nearly cleaned out the cave. And they found remains of at least 14 individuals in the cave in different states of preservation. During the Japanese invasion of China, starting in 1937, an attempt was made to send them to the United States for safekeeping, but alas, they were lost en route. And there are still searches being made, and I think at least 2 people have zeroed in on the same site, so it may well be that within a few years we will get the remains back again. Fortunately, excellent casts and X-rays have been made of these fossils, and a few more specimens were found. 1959, 1966, and others are now known from other sites in China, and the site incidentally has since been dated rather older than this 500,000 that's claimed here. So here's some of them. Here's the 6 skull caps from the early excavations. Here's some skulls from 2 skulls from other sites, bottom left, and a jaw from a different site, bottom right. And in the middle of the right is the jaw found at Jokotien locality 1 in 1959. And just to its left are 2 skull fragments which were found in 1966. And these 2 skull fragments are very interesting because they fitted exactly with a fragment of one of the skulls discovered in the 1930s. I mean, a cast of this fragment, which tells us a number of things. One thing is, of course, it depicts what the skull looked like, enables us to measure its cranial capacity and so on. And the other thing, of course, is that it is a tribute to the accuracy of the casts which were made in the 1930s. Okay, Neanderthal man. What Jack Chick says about that is dishonest. It's a piece of obfuscation. The particular skeleton was from a site called La Chapelle-aux-Saints. Neanderthal people are found, I think remains of them have been found in about 60 sites in Europe and Western Asia, as far east as the Altai Mountains. And indeed, Strauss and Cave, not just Cave, said that the La Chapelle-aux-Saints skeleton was that of an old and arthritic man. They were right, but they stressed it was not an old and arthritic modern man. It was an old and arthritic Neanderthal man, and Neanderthal people differ strikingly from modern people. So here's a selection of Neanderthal remains, and there's a child's skull there. There's the, right in the middle of the picture, there's the skeleton studied by Strauss and Cave, and it is indeed arthritic. Here's a selection of others. One bottom right, going off the bottom of the slide, from a site called Steinheim in Germany, is a very old specimen, which is another of those specimens which is intermediate between Homo heidelbergensis and Homo neanderthalensis. So it's sort of on the passage, evolving from one to the other. Okay, the other 2 are also, I think, attempts to mislead. Who is New Guinea man? I think they mean the Italy skull from the Gulf Coast of southern Papua New Guinea mainland. It's only 5,000 years old. It's a typical modern Australo-Melanesian skull, and it's never been thought to be anything else. So I don't know why it's on this diagram, except just as an attempt to mislead. Look, you see, fossils supposed to depict human evolution are actually something else, are actually more. And the same Cro-Magnon man again. It's a very robust modern human type. It's about 28,000 years old, from France, and it's never been thought to be anything else but a modern human. So there we are. That's what comes from Recapitulo. This is what's made of this creationist site, and I'm sorry to say that all of the creationist sites that I've seen are cartoons, and even some with pretensions to sophistication, like Graham Gish, also indulge in this obfuscation, and sometimes outright fibbing. Okay, humans and other hominoids. We belong to a group, a zoological group called the hominoids, which are a group of catarrhine primates. There's another term. Oh, I'm sorry to blind you with some. But anyway, we'll come to it. including also the apes. And the apes are the chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, and gibbons. Some of you may have heard of an ape called the bonobo. That's a species of chimpanzee. Hominoids differ from monkeys. Apes are not monkeys. They differ from monkeys first by having no tail, except as an embryo. And in human and other ape embryos, at 5 to 6 weeks embryonic age, they develop a tail. It has 10 to 12 vertebrae, and it regresses afterwards. This is an example, just an example of how I don't say that an animal climbs its family tree as it develops, but in some cases you do get relics of former periods which have not been lost in embryonic life. They have broad rib cages, they have broad hip bones, short and lumbar spine, that's the small of the back, and so on and so on and so on. In other words, there's a lot of characteristics which apes and humans share and differentiates them from monkey. So there's a baboon bottom left, which is a monkey, and there's gorilla and human skeletons on the right. Then you can see that they have many features in common which differentiate them from monkeys. And this is a family tree. Now, when you don't have a lot of fossils, and often when you do, as a way of testing what you've got by the way of fossils, you can make a molecularly based genealogy. So you take a particular molecular site, something from mitochondrial DNA. This is quite usual, but now they're using what's called nuclear DNA, which is actually the stuff that makes us. And they all reach exactly the same conclusion, which is that our closest living relatives are chimpanzees. In the jargon term, humans and chimpanzees are sister groups. Our joint closest living relative is gorillas. So in the jargon again, gorillas are the sister group to chimps plus humans. And conversely, chimps and humans form the sister group to gorillas. And their sister group is the orangutan, and their sister group is the gibbons. Their sister group are the old world monkeys, the monkeys of Africa and Asia, like baboons. And their the sister group to all of us are the new world monkeys, the monkeys of South and Central America, like spider monkeys and marmosets. And it happens that if you've got a decent fossil record, then you can calibrate some of these molecular genetic trees, and the more the better the fossil record is, then of course the surer the calibration is. And so you can derive what's called a molecular clock. And you do indeed find that, at least within local parts of the great tree of life, there has been very much a sort of constancy in rates of evolution. So we calculate that chimps and humans separated about 6 million years ago, and our common ancestors separated from the ancestor of gorillas, 8 million and so on, you see up the tree. There is one further thing which arose about 5 or 6 years ago, that because of some genetic findings, it was proposed that about 4 million years ago, proto-chimpanzees and proto-humans interbred and separated again, leaving the legacy of this interbreeding in the human genome. Okay. These Australopithecines, including Australopithecus afarensis, which I showed before, are about the halfway point. So if you see chimps and humans separated about 6 million years ago, and things living about 3 million years ago are halfway along. And so here we get two species of these Australopithecines, Australopithecus africanus in the middle at the top, and Australopithecus africanus in the middle at the bottom. And they are indeed, in many respects, intermediate. And I'll show you how in a moment, but for the moment we can see that they have brains slightly larger for their body size. Their brow ridges, look, are much less developed than those of chimpanzees and gorillas. Their canine teeth are smaller. The skull at the bottom, unfortunately, the canine teeth were lost during excavation, but other specimens of the same species show this. And the back of the skull, where the postural muscles attach, are less vertical. Because you see, in humans, you see, we are upright all the time, and so where the postural muscles attach is low down on the back of the skull, whereas in chimps and gorillas, they walk on their knuckles, and so the postural muscles are higher up. And those of are intermediate, as you see. And the hole through which the spinal cord enters the skull to join the brain is much further forward in modern humans than it is in apes. And in Australopithecus africanus, which you can see in the middle, you see it's much more like humans, not quite as far forward as in humans. Okay, so there's another way in which the Australopithecines are dead intermediate. And here's another way. This knee, you see, which in modern humans you see slopes in from the hip to the knee, putting the centre of gravity, you see, above the shins, the lower legs. And sloping in like this is called the valgus knee. And you can see on the left, there's a chimpanzee, and you can see the knee is not valgus, the femur goes right down. So when a chimpanzee walks upright, which they do sometimes, they sort of waddle like that. But you can see that the Australopithecus knee is valgus, like ours. There's no doubt about it. These Australopithecines were bipedal. Okay, there's a chain of intermediates between Australopithecus and modern humans, and here are some of them. Okay, leading from Australopithecus to various species of Australopithecus have a very wide geological range. The very earliest of them is actually 4.1 million years old. The latest of them is only 2.3 million. And there are some side branches coming from that, which are called Kenyanthropus, for example. But then we go on to Homo habilis, and we go on to Homo ergaster, we go on to Homo heidelbergensis, and finally Homo sapiens. But have a look, you see at each stage, between each stage, there are individual fossils which cannot be classified. So these two, which I've put between Australopithecus and Homo habilis, note that the dates of Homo habilis are later than those of Australopithecus, but there are a couple of fossils. These are just two well represented fossils. There's others that are more fragmentary. And there's been a lot of argument over whether these particular ones are in fact Australopithecus or Homo. So in a way, you see, we're playing the semantic game by asking that question. They are intermediate. And similarly, between Homo habilis and Homo ergaster, there are intermediates which are classified with one and with the other. These are three skulls from an unexpected place. We're always finding unexpected things. They're not from Africa like the rest of them. They're from the Republic of Georgia, by the Caucasus Mountains. And there again, we find there's a skull, an example of a number of skulls, which might be, you see people have said, is this late Homo ergaster, or is it early Homo heidelbergensis? Well, if you want to put them in pigeonholes, you can ask the question, what is meaningless, because it's intermediate between them. And then finally, the one in black and white on the bottom is an early Homo sapiens, and this one is 100,000 years old. Just to talk about some of these side branches a moment. One of the side branches from Homo ergaster is the famous Homo erectus from Java, which used to be called Java man, and its relatives that we've seen from China, which used to be called Peking man. And then a side branch from Homo habilis, Does anybody see anything that's missing there? What about the hobbit, Homo floresiensis? Now, this is something a lot of people are working on, and I'm working on it with an Australian colleague and 2 American colleagues, and what we conclude is that in fact Homo floresiensis, the one that was found on the island of Flores in southeastern Indonesia, dating to within the last 100,000 years. It's descended from a separate lineage from Homo habilis. So there's side branches everywhere. Don't think that our ancestors were looking at the far horizon and going onward and upward to become us. And what about before Australopithecus? Because, as we were saying, before Australopithecus, there's almost the same amount of time. The earliest species of Australopithecus is the one that goes back to 4.1 million years ago, and then Ardipithecus rabidus, represented by, in fact, 2 complete skeletons, of which this is one, 4.4 billion. Also, probably, upright bipedal. Before that, we have more scrappy remains. And this is something that, of course, a young earth creationist is going to jump at. Oh, you've only got scrappy remains. So you have to admit, if that's so, that Australopithecines, they found a continuous line to us. The Australopithecines, perhaps they were created in the first week of 4004 BC. Okay, they are scrappy remains, and this one, Sahelanthropus chadensis, you see, it's argued, is it the early member of the human line, or the earliest member of the chimpanzee line, or one of the earliest members of the gorilla line, or a common ancestor to, say, chimps and humans. But that's the sort of question you're going to ask when you find such an early fossil, isn't it? Because as you trace lineages backward, they converge and they become indistinguishable. Now we know much less of chimpanzee evolution or gorilla evolution than we do of human evolution. But what we do know is that they haven't changed quite as much as we have. They have changed, but not as much. Okay, so there we go. Have I really? The last one. I think so, yes. That was the last one. Hold on. Oh, okay. Thank you. I forgot that I put the last slide in. Okay, so there's the story. There's the story of human evolution. I've spoken to too much detail on some things, not enough on others, and I hope I've got enough time to ask a couple of questions